And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
It was 1776 when the founders signed the writ of independence from the Brits. It was revolution.
Tonight's featured show is Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. Welcome to the Republic News Network for our live national broadcast. You may call me Kelby, and tonight I'm going to be acting as your moderator. The RNN, which stands for the Republic News Network, has been doing this radio show since 2010, and it's always been a friendly introduction for the people of the United States Corporation. Here we go. It's true. The United States is a federal corporation, and their exclusive jurisdiction is in the District of Columbia. The Republic government was simply a bunch of U.S. citizens that in law don't have access to the Bill of Rights, and they realized they wanted to be Americans as our founders and our law provided each and every one of us. See, we've been hard at work since 2008, and since 2010, we have successfully re-inhabited the original government vacated under Lincoln in 1861. I know, it's hard to understand. Don't worry. We are law-abiding, peaceful Americans and very pro-government, and we love our country. You can consider the Republic members are tired of the corruption that we see every day. See, we found in the law that there is two forms of government here on the land, and we did something about it. We are people. Mothers, fathers, sons, daughters. We have families just like you. We simply found some truths, and now we're sharing these important truths with the rest of the world. So get ready to hear things that sound amazing, and get ready to understand that you too are about to be a part of history. We welcome each one of you to Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel and your Republic if you so choose. But before we go into our broadcast tonight, please bow your head in prayer.
Lord, we want to thank you for the opportunity to share truth with the rest of the world. Father God, bless the people on this call. Allow for them to be protected as they expose some very hard facts about evil men that rule this world. Bless Dan Happel, and as we move forward, just give us grace and protection. And we pray this in your Son's name. Amen. Mr. Happel, I yield the floor to you, sir.
Thank you, Kelby. Tonight we've got two terrific guests returning from previous shows, but we're doing, I believe that this is the first time that Alex and Holly have actually done a radio show together. And tonight's program is called Education or Indoctrination, the Refocus on American Education, and we are going to be focusing primarily on the Trump administration and many of the promises that President Trump made during the election, during his campaign, and some of the things that we have seen since his first 100 days started, and some of the positives, some of the negatives, and discuss ways that we believe we can return a good, solid education for our youth back to the American private sector, and keep the Fed from, or remove the Fed, I guess, from our education department and make education a local matter again, like it was always intended, and like it was until not that long ago. So with that said, Alex, I would love to have you give a little bit of your background in the area of education and writing, and then we'll turn the floor over to Holly for the same thing.
Well, thank you so much, Dan. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and thanks to the listeners who are taking the time to listen. My education actually was somewhat unique. I was raised in all different countries. I went for 7 years. I went to a French school, believe it or not, in Mexico. That was weird. And then to some of the most elite international private schools in the world in Brazil and in Switzerland. And so I had the opportunity to have, really fantastic education. It was very heavy on globalist brainwashing, the UN and all that stuff, but nothing a little bit of truth can't solve. But it gave me a very unique perspective on education. And when I started writing for the New American Magazine, that's what I do most of the time. I'm a foreign correspondent and a correspondent for the New American Magazine. I started realizing, I actually never went to a government school in the United States until university, but I started realizing that, hey, these institutions are being used, not just to brainwash people. That was pretty self-evident after I started waking up and realizing what was happening, but to purposefully dumb down the children. And so I ended up, long story short, another writer for the New American and WorldNet Daily. I write for both of them, mostly the New American. But Dr. Sam Blumenfeld, who'd been working in this area for 50 years, I think he wrote 12 books on education, really prolific writer, made some amazing discoveries, and he really did a lot of the, old school research. He would go into, university archives and libraries and pull out this information that had been lost to history. And so I was blessed with the opportunity to work with him on his final book. It was called Crimes of the Educators. And, I considered myself well-informed on education until I started working with Sam on this book, and I realized I had a whole lot to learn. So since then, I've continued to write very prolifically on education in the New American and occasionally in other publications. And I also teach. I teach at the Freedom Project Academy, which is a wonderful, wonderful school with classical education, based solidly on, Christian biblical worldview. And so it's just been an amazing opportunity, some wonderful kids. And I realized, many years ago that all these other battles we're fighting, and Dan, I've been on your show a few times, we've talked about so many of these other things, but all of these other fights that we're involved in are all for nothing if we lose the education fight, because right now they have the minds of the children, not all the children, certainly plenty are escaping, but they have the minds of enough children where if we lose this fight, all the rest of it becomes a moot point. So that's why I'm so passionate about this, and I was honored to meet Holly, actually, and she's got her own interesting story to tell. So go ahead, Holly.
Thank you very much. I agree with you wholeheartedly. If we lose our children, it is, basically, as Stalin said, so go the children, so go the nation. And that's really where we are at this point. How I got into this, very briefly, is in the late 80s. I began hearing different, I guess you would say, comments regarding what was going on with the environmental movement. And depending on who you were talking to, you would get two completely different perspectives on the environmental movement. And I care about the land, the air, the water, just like all of you. And the interesting crossroads between this and education is that I have been involved all of my life. I went to college to become a teacher. I have always done volunteer programs. Working with youth is a passion of mine. I've done it all my life. And as I started wanting to know more about the environmental movement and what was really going on, I started attending conferences. The more conferences I attended, the more there was a key piece of activism targeting the children of our nation. And I started studying that along with everything else. And to bring it into perspective, I wrote the book Set Up and Sold Out, Find Out What Green Really Means, to show a specific political agenda was attached to the environmental movement. Although the environmental movement alleges to be nonpartisan and has gained unprecedented access into America's schools, in reality, the facts confirm that the environmental movement itself, the Green Movement, is advancing an agenda that mirrors communism and Green Party goals. That's what my second book also documents thoroughly, the political agenda, the harmful political agenda behind education for sustainability. And what I have seen in my activism as I created the national campaign, We Choose Freedom, to not just pass on America's founding principles to our children, but also to get the political indoctrination which is now occurring in our schools stopped in our schools. Because what my perspective, my research shows, spanning a 20-year period, the documentation confirms that the politicized programs that the environmental movement is pushing, the curriculum, the politicized curriculum, the environmental movement is pushing into our schools, again, is turning our schools into a communist model of education where the children are politically indoctrinated, again, to adopt the ideology of the Green Party, which mirrors communism, and the end game is communism. So that's how I got into it. that's where we are today, working to stop the indoctrination of our children, and that is why I share that passion completely with Alex.
Okay, great. Holly, I will use that really as a segue into a comment that I'm going to make, and that is John Dewey, the father of progressive education, was a Fabian socialist, as we all know, and published Psychology in 1886 and worked to reform American education from little individualists to little socialists. And with money provided by the Rockefeller and Carnegie Foundations, Dewey founded the Progressive Education Association and began to shape curriculums of Columbia and then other teacher colleges to reflect a change in teaching from individualism to collectivism. And that really fully balances and fully supports what you just said. So, Alex, I would love to start out this thing with your article, What Can Americans Expect from Trump's Education Department, that appeared in the March 6, 2017 New American Magazine, and really frames our discussion for this evening. Would you like to talk about that article and what you see as positives and negatives of President Trump's first 100 days?
Sure. Well, thanks for that, Dan. And yeah, that's an article I wrote some time ago, but I think it's just as relevant today. Not a whole lot has changed since then. We're still on the same path. And so, to summarize it very briefly, on the campaign trail, Trump said a lot of things that the American people wanted to hear, and he proposed a lot of really good ideas. He talked about we're going to get rid of Common Core. He explained that the schools were brainwashing the children, that progressives had hijacked the schools and were using them to indoctrinate the kids. I mean, he was right on the money. He says, so we're going to get rid of Common Core. He never explicitly promised that we were going to shut down the Department of Education, but he made numerous references to, maybe we'll shut it down. It's probably a good idea for us to get rid of it. And, so he was really on the right track. He sounded, in education terms at least, a lot like Ronald Reagan did. Reagan, of course, promised he was going to shut down at that time, very new U.S. Department of Education. Again, Trump never promised it explicitly, but he touted it and he promoted this idea. Unfortunately, after the election, things started changing pretty radically, actually. Right from the get-go, when he announced the selection of Betsy DeVos, the press release that they put out, and actually they've taken it down from the Internet since then, but I have a copy. It says that they were going to get rid of Common Core and they were going to promote it didn't say they were going to get rid of Common Core. It said they were going to promote higher national standards. And so, to me, that was really, like a blaring alarm bell. What do you mean higher national standards? We didn't elect you to create higher national standards. You said you were going to get rid of the national standards. You said you were going to consider shutting down the Department of Education, that you were going to stop the brainwashing in the schools. So that was a pretty big alarm bell. And then I started digging into Betsy DeVos, and, more alarm bells, of course. She was almost single-handedly responsible for ensuring that Common Core was not dislodged from the state of Michigan, where she lived. And, she had all these organizations that were pushing Common Core in the state legislature and were attacking the legislators who were trying to get rid of it. And her influence actually extended far beyond Michigan. She was actually serving on the board of none other than Jeb Bush's Education Foundation. So, that was really, really troubling to see this kind of stuff. Trump very accurately on the campaign, he attacked Jeb Bush as a globalist, as an establishment hack, as one of the architects of Common Core. And so it was really shocking to me to see him put somebody who was so close to Jeb Bush and this Common Core project to lead the U.S. Department of Education. Now, the reports say that Betsy DeVos is a good Christian and that she wants to do good things with the schools. But as far as I can tell, the main policy agenda that they've been pushing, and already she's been very, very misleading on this issue of Common Core. Since I wrote that article that you referenced, Dan, she's come out twice now and said that the ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, and she uses these very shady words. She says it essentially did away with the argument about Common Core. It basically gets rid of Common Core, and of course it does no such thing. It actually entrenches Common Core in the schools even more firmly than before. It gives the Education Secretary the power to approve or deny standards. It demands that all states receiving federal funds adopt, what the legislation calls college and career ready standards, which is, just another code word for Common Core, and this has been well known among education policy people for many years now. So all it did was entrench Common Core and add a whole bunch more terrible stuff to the top. And, we know this, first of all, from looking at the legislation, and second of all, right after the Republicans passed the bill, and they were going around blabbering about how this allegedly restored the proper federalist balance and gave power back to the states, Arne Duncan, Obama's education secretary, who would brag about UNESCO being his partner, his global partner in creating these green global citizens, as he would put it. He talked about he quoted a communist terrorist and said that education is actually a weapon to change the world, right? Who knew? But so he came out and he said, hey, this is awesome. Every bit of Obama's agenda on education has now been put into federal law for the first time. So ESSA, that Betsy DeVos talked about, does not get rid of Common Core. It keeps Common Core. And this idea that suddenly Common Core is not an issue anymore, it's preposterous. Common Core is still in all the schools, and getting rid of it is not the be-all and end-all of everything, but it is certainly a positive step in the right direction, and they're not pursuing that. Instead, Betsy DeVos is pursuing these charter schools. And I know there's a lot of disagreement among well-meaning people in the conservative movement, the libertarian movement, the liberty movement, the Constitution movement, but I think there's a few extremely worrying things with this agenda. One of the big ones is that the government's own studies, the Federal Reserve did a study, and they found that these charter schools and the public funding for nominally private schools crowd out in truly independent private schools and Christian schools. So we certainly don't want that. When the church schools do start taking government money in the states where that's happened, suddenly they really lose a lot of their Christianity, a lot of their faith. So we don't want that. And I can give a report from Sweden. Now, I was living there when all of this happened. And so, I'm very intimately familiar with what happened. I was writing about it in 8 or 10 different magazines and doing everything I could to stop it. But they did a very similar thing. They said, oh, yeah, what we'll do is we'll just have public funding so all the kids can send their children, all the parents can send their children to any school they like, Christian school, Muslim school, private school, doesn't matter. So they did that, and they let it slide for a little while, and then they closed the trap door. They said, just kidding, now you all have to teach the national curriculum because you all take government money. And, for some perspective, the national curriculum expects first and second graders to understand that homosexuality is good and that gender is a social construct and everybody has a right to choose their gender. So this is a disaster, and I suspect that's the real agenda behind this, charter school movement, the school choice movement that Betsy DeVos is cheerleading. And on top of that, to top it all off, there's no federal authority for involvement in any of this, right? The Constitution does not delegate any power over education to the federal government, so all this is unconstitutional off the bat. So unfortunately, I don't think there's a lot of positive developments that we can expect out of the Trump administration when it comes to education. And I hate to say that, because I have to admit I was excited about Trump. I thought he was going to do a lot of the right things, but on education, unfortunately, we're not seeing that.
Okay, well, I'm sorry to hear that I am seeing some similar things as well. Holly, what's your sense of the Trump Education Department, and what would you suggest that needs to be done to turn some of these negatives into positives?
I think all the so many of the things that you covered, Alex, are so well said, because the ESSA did not get rid of Common Core. No, it did not. And in a recent comment in an April 24th article by the Washington Post, they quote DeVos as saying, there isn't really any Common Core anymore. Each state is able to set the standards for their state. They may elect to adopt very high standards for their students to aspire to and to work toward, and that will be up to each state. When in the earlier part of the article, we still know that many of the states, I think it's 48 states, have adopted the standards. 8 states have officially repealed or withdrawn. 21 states have finalized revisions to the Common Core or in the revision process, and 17 states have not yet made any changes. So we're still right in the middle of the Common Core battle. ESSA did not take that away, and in fact, some of the components of the ESSA actually set the stage for a more John Dewey type of education system. One of the things that I do feel hopeful about regarding the Trump administration is just, again, in his first 100-day speech, he said specifically, we are going to bring education local and we're going to end Common Core. Now, is that possible? There's a lot of naysayers that say the Trump administration cannot do anything about Common Core, but there are avenues which can be taken that certainly would discourage any continuation of Common Core, but many of those components are part of how the U.S. Department of Education, as you mentioned, Alex, setting the standards, getting those standards approved and pushed out. So there's got to be a lot of work within the U.S. Department of Education, and I know Trump hinted at abolishing it, and eventually an act of Congress, that may be exactly what needs to occur.
Okay, well, I know that right now in Congress there's actually a couple of bills that would more or less do that. I don't know how much traction they've got, but I know that there is certainly some push to try to eliminate the Department of Education entirely and turn the education back to the states, which I believe, just like you, that that's really the direction we need to go.
Yeah, and that bill is H.R. 899, and the bill is the Department of Education shall terminate on December 31st, 2018. That's the goal of the bill. So I don't know how much traction that has at all.
Do you know how many sponsors were on that bill?
Now that I don't know. I know Congressman Thomas Massey from Kentucky, introduced it, but I do not know the number of co-sponsors. Do you, Alex?
No, I don't. When I originally reported on this, it wasn't a huge number. If I'm not mistaken, it might have been a dozen, maybe 2 dozen. But yeah, I think the bill still needs a little bit of work. I actually talked to Congressman Massey's office about this, and there's a lot of questions up in the air. So yeah, the Department of Education will shut down, but then are the bureaucrats just going to move on over to Health and Human Services or some other department and continue doing what they're doing? So my understanding was that they were going to try to add some meat to the bones here. But if Trump doesn't get actively involved in pushing this, I think the chances of it are pretty slim, unfortunately.
And I agree. And I think a direct link to the Common Core is the use, and it's been being used, as I'm sure you're aware, that the idea of Common Core being a new standard and a new curriculum, it has been used to push forward many of the politicized curriculums through, whether it be science standards or whether it be language arts, to push this into the schools and teach this politicized curriculum without people knowing, because it's coming, especially parents, it's coming under the banner of Common Core. So there's many pieces many layers to this Common Core, not only how it's actually getting into the schools, how the U.S. Department of Education is involved with all the pieces that make Common Core work. So I believe the combined Common Core and the political indoctrination issue of our children should be something that the Trump administration should combine efforts on and work diligently to alert the American people to this. Literally, I don't say this lightly. Many use the word crisis lightly. I don't. I think we have a crisis in American education. Would you agree, Alex? Dan?
Oh, no question about it. I go back to 1983 when the Ronald Reagan administration put together their commission, the National Commission on Excellence in Education. They said not only is this a crisis, they said that this educational model threatens our future as a nation and as a people. They said if a hostile foreign power had imposed this on us, we may well have viewed it as an act of war. And, that is really serious language coming from a government bureau, and I happen to agree with them. This is such a disaster, this pseudo-education system we have. It may well literally cost us our country, cost us our freedom, cost us our children, and cost us our prosperity. That's how high the stakes are. And, I'm with you, Holly. I don't like to be alarmist, and I like to keep a, positive face on and be optimistic. But this education situation that we find ourselves in is, beyond crisis mode. Again, I think the commission that Reagan put together got it right. This literally threatens our future as a nation and as a people.
Absolutely. Amen to that. That's exactly where we are. We've got to stop it, and we've got to stop it now.
Yeah.
Well, I know when we get into this discussion, we always go back to UNESCO, and I know that the first Director General of UNESCO was Sir Julian Huxley, and he stated that the primary role of UNESCO is to construct a worldwide education system to promote world government. I mean, they weren't even subtle about it. He stated it very publicly that that's exactly what they were trying to do. And lo and behold, here we are 70 years later, 65 years later, and we're getting exactly that.
And promoting a world government that is based on a communist form of government. That's why these politicized curriculums that are teaching our children to be against our form of government and for a communist form of government, and using, of course, the fear of environmental ruin as certainly a weapon, literally, to scare children into believing this. It's a very effective tactic to train our future leaders, our future voters, our future citizens, as I said, to be for a communist form of government and world government.
Absolutely right.
Alex,
and the evidence. Go ahead, Dan.
No, you go ahead. I was just going to say your observations on this, especially the anti-Christian aspects of what this world government idea is all about. Please tell us what your perspective is.
Sure. Well, thanks, Dan. And at this point, you literally cannot dispute anymore the idea that UNESCO is pushing a global education regime and that it's doing so very, very successfully. I mean, the evidence is so overwhelming. If it was a snake, it would bite you. I mean, they're putting out reports almost on a daily basis now, openly saying these things. So, I get the press releases from the United Nations, from the UNESCO, and I could talk on this for hours. I'll try to condense my thoughts as much as possible. But, just very recently, I wrote an article in the New American about a UNESCO report that they put out about textbooks. And they tell you right at the front of the report that, it's very important that the textbooks promote the agenda because textbooks are so influential in shaping the minds and the perspectives of children. And then they go through the whole roster of things that they want in the textbooks. They criticize certain countries for having textbooks that don't go with the agenda perfectly, and they praise other countries for having textbooks that do. And some examples, they praise the government of Sweden because they use textbooks now that promote alternative families and sexual diversity. So you can have 3 moms and 1 dad, or you can have 2 moms, or you can have any kind of thing like that. And so the UNESCO says that's wonderful. That's what we need to be doing. They demand that the schools teach global citizenship. And go look at the definition of global citizenship. The children need to be indoctrinated. They don't use the word indoctrinated, but they say that the kids need to understand that they belong not just to a country, but to global institutions. Exactly. So they're flat out telling you that they're moving toward a world government. Now, as for the communist element, they don't even bother to hide it anymore. The head of UNESCO, Irina Bokova, and I've written very extensively on this when they were trying to install her as the Secretary General of the United Nations, she is an actual communist from the Bulgarian Communist Party. Her father was a member of the Politburo and was the editor of the Bulgarian Communist Party's main newspaper. This Communist Party murdered hundreds of thousands of people, and it only fell ostensibly a couple of decades ago. So, this is all still very much alive and well. These people are literally running the UNESCO, which is, as we speak, constructing the global education regime. And their idea is, and again, this is all available in public reports. We don't have to speculate. We don't have to theorize. It's all right there in black and white in their own documents. They talk about first we need to get every country to adopt its own set of national standards and national tests. So Common Core was really the kind of finishing touch here, right? You got to nationalize the education system, and in the process of doing that, you're going to globalize the education system. That is what Common Core represents. And they brag that they've got, they went from 3 countries having national school standards when they started this initiative to, I think, 150 today. And they're almost there. There's a couple of holdouts where, the Constitution in the form of government makes it all but impossible, but they're working very hard toward that goal. And believe it or not, and you can go find this on UNESCO's webpage again, they have their own set of global education standards. They call it, surprise, surprise, the World Core Curriculum. And, this is, if you really want to go deep, deep down the rabbit hole, go look at this, the World Core Curriculum. The guy who wrote it, Under Secretary General Robert Mueller of the United Nations, he passed away a couple of years ago, but he openly, this wasn't hidden, this wasn't in some secret ceremony, he openly dedicated the World Core Curriculum to a woman called Alice Bailey. So, as to the anti-Christian element to this, for those who don't know, Alice Bailey was the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company. That literally, they eventually changed the name to the Lucis Trust because it was just too obvious. But this organization has been very, very close to the United Nations, going back generations. And Alice Bailey, and again, maybe I'm going too far off on a tangent here, but she wrote a series of books, and actually she didn't write them. She said she didn't write them. She said she would allow these, she called them ascended masters, to take over her body and write these books. So they've got Education and the New Age, for example. And, any Christian who believes the Bible, who reads their Bible, would instantly recognize this for what it is, right? This is demonic stuff. And so why would you dedicate your World Core Curriculum to a person who summoned demons to write books about the future of the global government and education unless something was really, really wrong here? And, it's so obvious at this point. The fact that they don't put it on the front page of the New York Times doesn't take anything away from the fact that this is now in the open, in your face. You don't even have to go looking for it to find it. I get press releases from UNESCO where they talk openly about it's the responsibility of the UN to help shape the spirituality and the ethics and the values and the beliefs and the attitudes of your children. And so, again, this is all in the open. We don't have to speculate. Nobody can call me a conspiracy theorist because we're not dealing with theories and we're not dealing with a conspiracy. This is out in the open, in plain view.
And it's based on facts and documentation. And to just parallel what you're saying, if I may, were you finished, Alex?
Yes, I am, yep.
I was just going to say, to parallel this, as you have the environmental movement and all their millions of dollars and their power and their push into the schools, it's important to understand how that mirrors communism too, and the push for a global government, a global citizenry, etc. It's important to go back to 1963 when Cleon Skousen, a veteran FBI agent, put 45 goals, entered 45 goals from the Communist Party into the congressional record. So this has been going on for some time. Number 17 is get control of the schools. Use them as transmission belts for socialism and communist propaganda. Soften the curriculum. Get control of teachers' associations. Put the party line in the textbooks. And so when you look at that goal, that's back in 1963, and you fast forward to where we are right now, and the takeover of education, the politicized curriculum that is openly promoting communism, but how do parents recognize it at the dinner table? How do parents recognize the demonic tone at the dinner table? Just as documented in Training for Treason, it's important to understand, as you're talking about an anti-God element here in the schools, is to understand humanism. John Dewey was a humanist, and humanists do not believe in the existence of God. One of the important points through the environmental curriculum, which is being pushed and taught from preschool right on through high school and on, is that man is part of nature. Now, man is part of nature is the number 2 goal on the Humanist Manifesto. Man is part of nature, number 2 goal on the Humanist Manifesto. So what we need to understand is, although that particular idea, man is part of nature, we were called to be good stewards, there's an element there that is acceptable, but when you understand the curriculum is designed to promote communism and turn the focus from creator to creation, that is why the man is part of nature is such a dominant part and a dominant theme in environmental literacy, environmental curriculum, those pieces. And that's why parents need to see this, and the more people understand this, the more we can join together to reclaim our schools, because we must reclaim our schools on the local level and work. There are some things that need to be done federally, but we must reclaim our schools and get this curriculum out of there, because we're losing children to this movement every day, and they don't know the difference. Little children are not prepared. They don't expect to go into school and be brainwashed. Parents expect their children to be taught. That's not what's happening. So we need to return our schools to safe havens of learning. And it's not a conspiracy theory at all. It's just right there. It's happening, and it was laid out a long time ago. It's just being executed.
Well, I visit with and have worked with our local school boards a number of years, and there are a lot of really, really good teachers in the system that I believe just have no idea the indoctrination in their teachers' colleges was so thorough that they have no idea that what they're teaching is communism. And I think
I
what
would
we need
agree
to
with
do,
that. A lot don't.
Well, what we need to do is we need to start really reforming the teachers' colleges before we do anything else. Is there something that we can do in that regard that we can pass along to the Trump administration and or our congressmen or senators and try to reform the teachers' colleges that are teaching this stuff?
If I could go first on that, I believe one of the things that we must do is have the attention of the Trump administration focused on the political indoctrination in our schools, going right on through to teach the teachers, so the teachers then will go impart this to the students. It goes all the way down. The idea is when the students, the teachers, are in college, then you have supposedly a more open curriculum and, the idea of academic freedom. So my thought would be that, yes, we do need to reform that level of education. I believe once people understand what's happening preschool through high school, if the Trump administration would understand the political indoctrination issue there, exactly what Alex mentioned, those components on the world government and, the fact we're in agreement losing our children, losing our country. If we start there, I think we've got to start there because we're losing our children there. Then I would head to the reforming the teachers' college, the teachers' education. But I'd start with the understanding of the children first because they are our most vulnerable.
Okay, thank you. Alex, what's your feeling about what we can do to turn this ship around and maybe how we can deal with the teachers' colleges as well?
Well, before the program went live, we talked a little bit about whether we're a few generations past where we should have been here, and we absolutely are. Unfortunately, we've had multiple generations of Americans now dumbed down in the government schools who really don't understand the U.S. Constitution, who really don't understand the ideas of liberty, who don't, they grow up believing in the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto, almost literally, right? You talk to people today, average everyday person, what do you think about a progressive income tax? Oh, yeah, that's wonderful. What do you think about a strong central bank with a monopoly on currency and credit? Oh, yeah, of course we need that. What would we do without the Federal Reserve? What do you think about government education? Oh, well, someone's got to educate the children. Who would do it except the government? And so, people grow up taking the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto almost for granted, right? This is normal. This is how life should be. And so we have a major, major problem here. And, I think we must reform the teachers' colleges. I think that needs to come eventually. And, we mentioned at the beginning of the program, that's what John Dewey did. John Dewey, the socialist and the humanist with Rockefeller money, he realized that the way to impose his agenda on the schools all across the country was through the teachers' colleges, and so they really went to work there. But I think I'm a little bit more radical than most people, and than you two as well. I think at this point the schools are beyond the point of reform. I think even if we had the Trump administration and a solid majority in Congress and a solid majority in the state legislatures on our side, we still would be in a situation that is untenable. I think the schools at this point are doing exactly what they're intended to do, and so that's what the system is designed to do. You can't reform a system that is literally designed to dumb down and indoctrinate the population. You can't reform it to do the opposite of that, to educate and not indoctrinate the children. So again, I think I'm a little bit more radical here, and I would say at this point the urgent thing to do is parents need to get their children out of the schools. Grandparents need to do the same thing. If there's any children in your life that you love, that you care about, children in your church, in your community, it's to use a metaphor, you wouldn't send your children into a burning building. You wouldn't send your children into a dangerous situation. But that's exactly what you're doing, and by sending them to a government school. And the stakes are even higher than just losing your children, because if we continue this, we're going to, again, lose our country. We're going to lose our freedom. So, I take the position, it might be considered radical, but I think we need to protect our children from this first and foremost, and I think that means getting them out of the government schools. And, maybe in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, if we succeed in, ripping out this wicked system from the roots and replacing it with something that makes sense, okay, then we can talk about, maybe having local schools funded with tax money. Maybe you can send your kids there. But at this point, I think they're so far gone, I don't think there's, any policy tinkering that we could do that would fix this mess, whether it deals with teacher colleges or, reform or getting rid of Common Core. I just think we're too far gone to reform this at this point.
And I don't think that is necessarily radical at all. We have a tremendous problem with the kids. If there are grandparents and parents that can get the children out of the school, I would not send my child to a school, a public school. However, we have, and we have a time crunch in that we may not be able to reform education at this point in time, but we have 89% approximately of young people attending public schools. And if people are not able to get their kids in a homeschool situation or in a Christian school situation, you still have those children sitting there. So my thought is we have to do both. If possible, if you have children and you can homeschool them, do so, because you're exactly right. It's like sending your child into a burning building. There is so much going on and so much pressure and so much it's mental warfare, it's psychological warfare on these poor children to adopt and conform, or they're going to get a bad grade if they don't do what they're told to do, and it's total indoctrination. It's to a saturation point. So I would agree with the fact that if there's any possible way, get your child out of school, and then, making this an issue, political indoctrination an issue we may not be able to get it done, but I believe the goal needs to be get this curriculum pulled and get it pulled now, and demand a return to basic skills, basic education, pull all the social programs. Some of that can be done. In the meantime, do your best to teach your kids at home. Get them in a homeschool or a Christian school. But we cannot just leave 89% of our children, and even if we drop that number and 40% of that 89 were homeschooled, that'd be awesome, but you still have 40%. So we've got to do our very best to save the kids that are still there. I agree with you wholeheartedly, Alex. The homeschool movement, getting your kids, don't send them into a burning building, but there's the ones that are left, we've got to do our best to save them as well, and that's what We Choose Freedom is all about.
Yep, I agree with you entirely, Holly. And, that's why I do what I do on the education reform initiative. I always tell people, first and foremost, protect your own kids. But as you mentioned, there's some kids that no matter what we say, no matter how clearly we show their parents that this system is going to harm their children morally, spiritually, mentally, physically, academically, they'll still do it anyway. They would rather watch their football and drink their beer and, do whatever than be concerned with the education of their children, and we absolutely cannot. We have a moral imperative to do what we can to protect those children. If you saw a kid drowning in the river, you would do something to help them. And so I think that's the kind of situation we're facing here. And so I agree with you entirely, Holly.
And the Trump administration could go and do a tremendous service to our country by alerting the American people to this situation that we have in education, to really alert the American people, make this issue beyond Common Core, make this issue really the crisis in education we're facing, and call on the American people to do their best in their local area to help us clean this mess up.
Yeah, if we could get back to the kind of rhetoric. Go ahead, Dan.
Well, that always is really what it boils down to, is participation by parents and being involved with their children's education. And quite frankly, that has been one of the problems, that a lot of parents have allowed the system to take their children, and basically they become the schools become babysitters. And in doing that, they end up really losing control of their children's education, and they also lose the influence that parents have over children on moral issues, on all kinds of issues. Alex, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking, if we could get Trump back to the kind of rhetoric he was using on the campaign and get him to, focus that, because, on the campaign trail, he said some things that were just absolutely hitting the nail on the head about the education system being hijacked by, far left bureaucrats and this kind of thing. I mean, he was right on the money. So if you could get some significant segment of the American public to understand this, and I think there is a growing awareness about this. I know a significant number of public school teachers, and they're all very aware of this. Every single one of them that I know homeschools their children. And so, there is a growing awareness of this. But if we could get the President of the United States and, people like that to just raise awareness of this so that people wouldn't be in ignorance anymore. If you still want to send your kid into the burning building, well, at least we know that we warned you that the building was on fire and we did what we could. And I do think that, that would be a very, very powerful thing. And so, I have to say I'm a little bit disappointed with where things have gone since the election, but, hopefully it's not that all hope is lost. And I do know that there are some good people working within the administration, within the White House and within the cabinet and within, the various departments. But this battle is just so monumental that, we really, if we're going to make progress here, it's going to take all the combined energies of a lot of very good people. So.
Oh, I agree. One of the things that I think most parents recognize is the emphasis right now seems to be on sports and on cooperation and working together rather than on deductive reasoning and the things that used to be an important part of the education of individuals. Do you see that same thing being used as a tool to dumb down our children? It's pretty obvious to me.
Yeah, I think there's no question about it. The schools have really moved away from teaching all of the critical stuff. And, if you want to take it all the way to the very basic level, when parents think of what is the purpose of sending my child to a government school, the 3 R's come up, right? Reading, writing, arithmetic. Unfortunately, the schools are not even doing that. And, we show this in the book Crimes of the Educators. Since Dewey, there has been a deliberate agenda to harm children's ability to read, literally. And I realize that that's an incredible sounding statement to somebody who has not looked at all the evidence. But what they're doing in the schools is they're teaching reading in a way that they know, and it's been known since the 1840s, to cause permanent, lifelong reading disabilities, a hatred of reading, dyslexia, all these problems, and they know this. So not only are they distracting using sports and teaching propaganda in the science class and in the history class, they're not doing the things that we expect them to do. And reading is so fundamental, because if you can read, all the indoctrination in the world, you can still go out and go to the library and buy a book or read the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence or pick up the Bible, right? If you can read, you can educate yourself. And so that's why it's so critical that children be able to read. And that's why in the Common Core, and this has been going on since long before Common Core, but Common Core solidifies it across the nation. What they do is they start in kindergarten. They start the kids, and you can read the Common Core standards yourself. I encourage you to do that. They start the kids on memorizing words, right? They give them a list of sight words that they're supposed to memorize. And when you memorize words, your brain starts building a reflex that's completely improper when it comes to reading our alphabet. We have a phonetic alphabet, so we don't memorize words, whole words as symbols. We're supposed to understand that each letter is a symbol associated with a sound. And what they do here with this whole word method, which they start in kindergarten, is to teach the kids to look at words as symbols in and of themselves. Now this builds, again, this terrible reflex in the mind that will produce lifelong reading disabilities. That's why, even according to the government's own numbers, I saw a recent one, State Education Agency report out of Washington, D.C., more than 2/3 of the residents of Washington, D.C. over the age of 15 are functionally illiterate. And that sounds incredible. I mean, if someone walked up on the street and said that to you, you'd say, that's ridiculous. Get out of here with that. But you can go and read the reports yourself. So we have a situation in which the schools are not doing the very, very most basic things that we expect them to do, teach reading and teach writing and teach arithmetic. But they are doing, they're spending $20,000 a year per student on fancy new laptops and computers and sports materials and gymnasiums and all this other kind of stuff. So it's totally, completely reversed, totally, completely backwards. And again, it's a crisis of such monumental proportions that it's hard to even wrap your mind around it.
Well, that's pretty amazing. And those statistics, I've read the same statistics, and what it really boils down to at this point is that our education system has been hijacked completely with a Soviet system, and that system is not designed to teach people to be critical thinkers. It is designed to make people good workers and subservient and willing to work with others in their community to achieve common goals, and that is communism. That's all there is to it. Holly, I'd like your input on some of this too. Holly?
I think we lost her.
Uh-oh. Okay. Well, I guess at that point we will go on with. I have a statement here about Benjamin Bloom, and certainly he's someone that you're familiar with, Alex, the father of outcome-based education. But he changed the focus of education from a general liberal arts education, benefiting everyone on an individual basis, to a behavioral psychologist system of emotions, feelings, and working together to achieve common goals. And that's called operant conditioning. I'm sure you've written about that in Crimes of the Educators. Would you like to expound on that a little bit?
Sure. Well, and this, we could continue this conversation for hours. I know, Dan, it's so much we could talk about, but I'm glad you hit on this because it's just so important that parents understand this too. Bloom was one among many of these, psychoanalysts and psychologists who got involved in the education field. Many of them, along with John Dewey, actually. Many of John Dewey's colleagues were, these early psychologists and psychoanalysts and psychotherapists and so on. And they looked at children, and if you read their writings, this comes through loud and clear. They looked at children in accordance with their worldview, which was that humans are part of nature. Humans are just a type of animal. And so in the same way that we train a circus animal, for example, to jump through a hoop, that's how we need to train children, right? So children are just slightly more advanced, biological stimulus response mechanisms, and what we want to do is use the appropriate stimuli and the appropriate rewards and punishments to kind of modify the behavior and the values and the beliefs and the attitudes of these children. And so that is the point where we're at now. And this has been in place for many, many years. Not too long ago, I read a book that was published in 1978, Change Agents in the Schools by Barbara Morris, talking about, some of this behavior modification and some of this values clarification that they're doing in the schools. And, they're treating the students as, patients, as almost circus animals in training them to just have these reflexive responses to different stimuli. So, take the environment, for example, right? When you hear anything about the environment, you're supposed to have this natural reaction, which is, the global government is going to protect us from environmental catastrophe. If we just give up more rights and freedoms, the global government will protect us from, the ravages of freedom and free markets and environmental destruction and all this other stuff. So the manipulation that's going on here is so highly advanced. It's been honed over a period of more than 100 years to accomplish exactly what it's accomplishing, that we really are in a kind of David versus Goliath battle, unfortunately. And that doesn't mean that all hope is lost, right? I mean, we all remember who won in the battle between David and Goliath, but it does mean that, we have to understand the seriousness of this. We have to understand the enormity of what we're facing. And we have to understand that so many of our fellow Americans are victims of this themselves. And so they're even conditioned to respond negatively when they're presented with this kind of information. So we really do have an enormous battle ahead of us. But, and I said this at the beginning of the program, if we don't fight this battle, all the rest of the battles that we're fighting are lost, and we might as well just hand over our freedom and our money and our children and, pack up our bags and strap shackles to our arms and legs. So I'm not willing to do that. I'm going to keep fighting until the end, and I hope the listeners will too. But, just do that with the understanding that we're, 100 years down road from where this all began. We've been subjected to very advanced psychological manipulation and training and conditioning designed to move us toward this totalitarian world system. And so we really are facing a huge battle here, but we got to fight it.
Oh, I agree. Well, I wanted to mention that you and Holly will be at the Red Pill Expo in Bozeman, Montana on June 22nd, 23rd, and 24th, and that you will be speaking on an education panel, and you will be speaking on this particular subject. And so I want our listeners to understand that they will be able to see you both in person and have an opportunity to visit with you about this very important subject and hear a great deal more about the education of our youth and the indoctrination of our youth that's been going on over the last 100 years. Holly, did you get back on? No, it doesn't sound like she got back on. Alex, would you like to, I'd like to give you a few minutes just to talk about some of your projects and then also to do a little plug for your book and possibly have our listeners give them the opportunity to purchase that book and give them locations where they can do so.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Dan, again, for the opportunity to be here and talk about this really important subject. One of the big projects that I'm working on as we speak is an education-related project. I'm working with a team of really, really, really good guys. Lieutenant Colonel Ray Moore, who was a chaplain in the military. He runs Frontline Ministries now, the Exodus Mandate. The idea is to get the kids out of the schools. I'm working with Dr. Duke Pesta, professor at the University of Wisconsin, who is the academic director of Freedom Project Academy, the school I mentioned. So we've got a very interesting project, a fascinating project. I consider it to be a very important project. And what we want to do is show parents that, hey, if you continue doing what you're doing, if you continue sending your children to the government schools to be brainwashed, our nation is going to lose its sovereignty. We're going to lose our freedoms. We're going to lose our Constitution. And there's no tinkering. You can't go to the school board and ask them to pick a better textbook and suddenly think that everything's fine and you can keep sending your child to government school. So we really want to, close all the emergency exits and make parents understand how important this is. because we really think that this is one of the keys to success here. Is we have to get as many children as possible rescued from these government schools and educated either in good independent schools, private schools, Christian schools, home schools, doesn't matter, something outside of this monstrous system that is coming for your children's minds and their souls. So that's one of the big things I'm working on. We've got some stuff going on at the school. Just this week we've started the Newman Report. I'm doing some twice weekly updates over there and a video update to keep people informed on what's happening on education. Of course, we've got the book Crimes of the Educators. That one was published in 2015 with Dr. Blumenfeld. If people want to get a copy of that, they can get it just about anywhere, online, especially if you can get it through Walmart, Amazon, Target, whatever thing you want. I'll bring some copies with me to the Red Pill Expo. I hope to meet everybody there. That's, I think, going to be a very exciting conference. I think it's going to be a great opportunity for people to get up to speed on so many of these issues. And then, of course, I got to mention the New American Magazine. I hope, if you're not a subscriber yet, please go out and get a subscription to the print issue. We focus a lot on education and a lot of the other crucial issues of our day, from a pro-truth, pro-constitution perspective. So it's really, the reason I started writing for it was because I consider it to be the best publication out there in terms of providing important, accurate information. And then, for those of you who either can't or won't subscribe to the print magazine, I do still encourage you to go online. We have a website, www.thenewamerican.com. And if you put your email in there, we'll send you a daily, once daily newsletter with the, I think, 5 or 6 most important stories that we published that day, and that'll come right to your inbox. So, so please check us out there. We got to stay informed. We got to figure out what's going on so that we can fight back. And with that, I'll turn it back to you. And just thanks again for having me, Dan.
Well, thank you, Alex. And I want to thank our listeners for joining us this week, because this is such an important, critically important issue. And we really need to get to the point where we can depend on the education of our children in a way that we know that we're really creating young citizens of the United States of America, young constitutional citizens, and they need to understand that. So with that, Kelby, I will turn the program over to you, and I thank our listeners for tuning in for another program on Connecting the Dots. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Happel, and thank you to our guests. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been a homeschool dad and a principal, so when my kids would get out of line, I'd have to come and do the principal job to set them back straight. And my kids are in calculus as seniors and juniors in high school, and some of the smartest kids that I know of. That does conclude our call this week. We do hold calls every Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific. We also encourage you to come to our weekly Wednesday Building the States phone call. It starts at 6 p.m. Pacific. You can get all this information at republicfortheunitedstates.org. Again, republicfortheunitedstates.org. God bless. Good night. We'll see you next Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific. Bye-bye.